You're listening to Intentionally Catholic, a podcast about living our Catholic faith with joy and intention.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm Dan Hansen, and as always, I'm here with Father Ron Hutchinson, and today we're going to talk about the topic that I've been wanting to talk about since we started this broader conversation on evangelism. Now, most of you are aware probably that I came from a Protestant background, and I entered into full communion with the Catholic Church about 10 years ago or so. My immediate family, my kids, are all Catholic as well. They entered the church a few years after me. However, my broader family, my parents, my sisters, and all of their families, they're all Protestant. And I've always, ever since entering the church, been curious about spreading the Catholic faith to them. You know, they're happy in their faith. They truly love the Lord. And I can only imagine the disruption that really would happen should some of them embrace the Catholic faith while others don't. You know, I know the disruption that my entrance into the church caused in the family and is still causing to some extent. I can only imagine what Christmas would be like should multiple people start to follow me here because of something I did. You know, so what about it? Is there a reason to evangelize Protestants? You know, there's a lot of disruption that we can cause in their lives. Is it worth it? Or should we just live and let live, so to speak? You know, they love the Lord in their way. I'll love them in mine. We'll just peacefully coexist. We'll get a little bumper sticker like that and just live happily like that. What do you think, Father? Is it really worth evangelizing Protestants?
Well, I guess I feel that evangelizing is definitely an aspect of living the faith that we need to be doing all the time, okay? But there's a difference between evangelizing and proselytizing, okay? So I feel evangelization is better understood as caught, not taught, okay? And what I mean by that is if you're evangelizing by how you're living your life and how it is being reflected in your life, and that can involve talking about the things you think are important and the value and why it's a value and all of that. That's evangelization, in my opinion, okay? If someone, because of that, starts to question or starts to be open or a seed bursts forth somewhere deep within them, that becomes their journey then, okay? Proselytizing is when we tell someone they're wrong entirely and that they're going to hell and all of those kinds of things, as long as they continue to live their faith that they're living, then I have significant problems with it. I do not think that's the way we go about it. Okay. And now and some of it is out of respect for people's lived faith. And some of it is about, I just don't think that it's a good way to bring people to the church. Okay?
It's not effective. It's certainly not effective. So
I want people to fall in love with what I fell in love with. I want people to desire what I think is so important. And the only way that's going to happen is that they get there little bit by little bit. Okay, if someone is not already there. And that's even, by the way, cultural Catholics or, you know, baptized and raised Catholics or Protestants or, you know, or even Orthodox, you know. I want them to find their way there because something opens up inside them and they say, I need to possess what that person has. I need it.
So what if they never get there? Is that matter? Is that a big deal?
I think, quite honestly, that it does matter, okay? I don't know that it's in a quote-unquote big deal like, oh, they're going to hell kind of big deal, okay? I don't believe that, okay? And I don't think the church believes that. So no salvation outside the church does not imply that they are not receiving the church's salvation in some form or fashion.
Now just so we're clear, we mentioned
non-Catholics.
Non-Catholics, we're still talking Protestant Christians, right? Christians, non-Catholic Christians.
Protestants, Orthodox, we could,
But we're not talking everybody.
No, I mean, there could be even a person who is ignorant of the church,
right?
Entirely ignorant of Christ, but lives in the light of the truth, but not without the knowledge that this is coming from Jesus Christ, the church would say has a possibility of salvation. Okay.
Right.
Now, that's why the church, for us, this is the beauty of purgatory. Okay. This is the beauty of the realization that we all have some level of purgation, some cleansing that needs to be done, some burning out through the fire of purgatory. And when I say fire, it's a fire of God's love that purgatory provides for us. So some may be there longer than others, but that's the beauty of it. Okay. That allows for a lot more understanding of how God is trying to save the whole world. Now, there will be those who don't make the choice for God, don't make the choice for Christ, and they will face those consequences. But interestingly enough, it gets back to exactly what I've said before, that they're going to be making the choice. Okay. And I think we get that possibility, that choice, right up to the moment that we face judgment, right up in judgment, to be quite honest with you.
We probably shouldn't live with the idea that for sure we do. We should probably make those decisions as soon as we can.
I think we should challenge ourselves also to live the truth.
Yeah.
And not, kind of like stake claim or have too much a sense of like, well, God will take care of it for me, But so I think there's a whole ways of looking at this that are much healthier and better for how we evangelize them.
Well, I completely agree with the proselytization versus evangelization. Nobody really gets a whole lot of you don't make a lot of ground with anybody when you're just telling them that they're wrong. That makes sense to me. And I do completely, it's in I think it's in Romans. Is it in Romans 2, where Paul talks about how, the evidence is all around us. We can look at the world around us and we can see that God exists. And the way I've always taken that is I can look at the world around me and that doesn't tell me that Jesus died for my sins. But what it does tell me is that there's something, and I always thought that's probably how it worked for people who never heard of Jesus, who didn't have an opportunity to ever hear of Jesus, as long as they were following whatever God gave them, and that nature around them is here. If they can realize there's something bigger, God looks on the heart. God's not a monster where, well, sorry, you didn't do X, Y, Z, boom, straight to hell. Like you said, that's where purgatory, it's not a nice idea that was created by the Catholic Church to kind of move us through something. It's a biblical truth. It's a biblical truth that demonstrates God's mercy and justice all in one there. And it makes it so that, we can understand how other people can make it in, because it's up to God. God's not bound by his sacraments. We are for the sacraments that we understand, but God can do whatever he wants and work around those. So back to evangelizing Protestants, I completely get all of that. You're saying you think it's important, but not big deal important. Did I get that right?
Well, what I mean by big deal is I don't want to sound like somebody's going to go to hell if they don't become Catholic, okay? Because I can't go that far, okay? That's what I mean by big deal, okay? I think it is still very important to evangelize and help others to come to the truth, okay? But does that mean I want you disrupting Christmas and Thanksgiving and turning it into a carnival, evangelization carnival? I want you to be careful about that.
And I certainly would, because I know the ramifications. Yeah. The earthly ramifications that I will deal with should I do anything like that. And I really wouldn't. What I'm more afraid of is that, somebody really would convert. And, oh my goodness, I can't imagine what happens in the family, the chaos.
Well, and it may happen. So you know what?
And I shouldn't say convert.
I would never. they would become Catholic.
Right.
Yes.
I think it's entering into full communion.
Yeah, entering
Conversion
into
is
full
different.
communion. Yeah, conversion is different. But everybody kind of understands what you're saying and we have to, though language matters. Language
Yep.
matters. But I wouldn't say that it's totally outside the realm of possibility. Okay. But I don't believe that's what you go into Thanksgiving dinner trying to create.
No.
Okay. How about if you just love them?
I can do that.
How about if you share when it is convenient or even inconvenient, but nonetheless, when it's the opportunity to share your faith, that you do it. That's what I think is important. I think sitting there and keeping your hands under your hind end and a piece of duct tape on your mouth the whole time just to prevent anything happening is also not what we're called to.
No, and that's where we live. We try to do what we can to talk about it from a non-confrontational point of view. This is what we did. Oh, this was interesting. Oh, this is why we do that. This is what we're thinking.
Kids talking about why they love serving, or what was so great about, Easter Vigil service, or, that if grandma hears that, if their aunt hears that, whatever, I think that's great because that is going to be how seeds get planted. Not, if your church only had this, you would be so much better off, that kind of thing. That's not gonna help anybody. Okay.
No. So that makes sense. I want to go into just a few questions because, and this is literally, these are things that I have been plagued with and have questioned for a long time since my entrance into the church. And we have not talked about these. So I'm very curious to get your take on some of these things. First off, let's go to this. Jesus says, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. John 6. I don't know the exact verse. We could look it up. Catholic teaching understands that to be referencing the Eucharist and Jesus' real presence there. Okay. So generally speaking, Protestants don't participate in the Eucharist in that manner. So now we've got Jesus saying, unless you do this, you have no life in you. My parents, my family, for all practical purposes, don't do that.
Okay.
So now we've got...
So you're saying, okay.
What do you think of that?
I think we have to... I would say, number one, I would want to make sure that he says no, life, okay, versus life, okay. I would want to know exactly what the quote says. Okay.
Let me look it up while you talk.
And I'd also want to make sure that, translation wise, that it's, moving from the Greek, to Latin to English, that is the translation. Okay. I have to admit that matters to me because that changes how we answer this. Okay. But.
So here's the quote that I've got in. It's a Catholic Bible, the NRSV.
Okay.
For what good that does.
New Revised Standard Version.
Okay. And now I lost it. Very truly, I tell you, this is John 6:53. So Jesus said to them, very truly, I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you.
Okay. So it does say no. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
No life in you. Okay. Well, no life can mean several things, okay? It could mean that you're living in a dead state, okay? Doesn't mean that that there's no possibility for salvation, but that you're not having the life that you could have, that is going to help you live fully what it means to be my disciple, okay? That's how I would take it, okay? We are missing something that gives us life when we don't have the Eucharist. Okay. That's why it drives me crazy when Catholics just don't think it's important to go to Mass on Sunday. It's like, okay, that week you have no life in you. You're living entirely on your own capabilities, your own will, your own everything. I'm going to get through this. Where when we're with Christ through the Eucharist, with the Eucharist, we have his life living in us. So you have no life. You don't have my life, I guess is what I would think he's saying there.
Yeah.
This is always where we have to be careful.
No, and
I mean,
of course,
we have to look at it like, how did Christ talk? How did he think? Okay. Well, and I think we have to be careful not to put words in his mouth. Okay.
Absolutely.
But in this case, what do we believe he's saying by you have no life? He's not saying you're dead, like literally dead. Okay.
Right.
He's saying your faith is deadened. It's dead.
And I think it's important to also, I guess when I look at that, one of the things that I've used to try to reconcile and make this make sense is Jesus is speaking. The church has not been even really established yet at this point. I don't believe. And so certainly there wasn't a Protestant church. There weren't various churches. And this goes back to things like no salvation outside of the church. When that was first codified, whatever you want to say, when that first became a belief of the church, there wasn't – basically what you were saying is you're either going to follow Christ or you're not. If you're not going to follow, this is where salvation comes.
There wasn't another way of following Christ.
Right. When Jesus is saying this, there weren't other things to be doing. Things have changed over time. And I do think that there was a questionable, that's, of course, it's always up to God to decide. But right when the switch is over, when the Reformation is happening, there's a lot of motives that who knows what the real motives were. When the motives were who knows what they were. Those people, but you've got people like my family, like I was completely convinced that we were right. I never even questioned it. So I think that some of that plays in too. I'm not doing this because I've weighed what Jesus said. I've understood it to mean take communion, receive receive me in the Eucharist. And I haven't heard that, processed it and said, no, thanks, Jesus. I get it. I believe it. I don't want it. Then I think Jesus is saying, look, you have no life in you. You're rejecting what I'm offering. For the people who don't know that, I don't believe there's a hell issue here at this point, in that regard for this reason, like what you're saying. I'm not concerned that, no life means everybody in my family is bound on the fast train to hell. Not at all. I do think, like you were saying, like you talked about the Catholics who miss Mass, we're missing out. And my family really is missing out on something very precious. And I miss out on it even when I receive it. Even if I don't receive it really focused on it, I'm missing out on the full impact, but I'm still getting it.
Yeah, you said it last time. I'll say our lives are deficient without it. Our lives are deficient. And when we have a vitamin deficiency, we need to take vitamins, okay? When we have, a hormone deficiency, we take those hormones. The doctor gives them to us. We have a Jesus deficiency. We have a grace deficiency when we are not receiving the Eucharist. So I think that makes a difference for how we live our Christian faith. Just think of it as like you're missing food you need to live. And I don't know which one of us can afford to have that missing from our lives. We need it. It's hard enough to live in this world by our own wits. Oh my gosh, our own will, our own capabilities. But boy, with the what is created, the efficiency that is given to us in Jesus Christ through the Eucharist. Man, why would we not want that? Why would we not want that?
Well, and that's the thing. Jesus established it, and I want my family to be a part of it. I want Protestants to be a part of it. So I think it's important to reach.
I want everybody to have
exactly
what they can have. That's where I get sad. I'll use that term, sad. Do I get mad? No, I'm not going to get mad about it. I'm just going to feel sad that there are people that are missing this wonderful opportunity, this wonderful gift. And God has given us so many gifts that we just don't value sometimes.
All right. So that was one of my big questions. Another question that I deal with and have dealt with is what about the teaching on mortal sins and how confession is needed to be freed from them? Okay, Protestants don't have access to the sacrament of reconciliation. And so venial sins, when I was Protestant, whatever I did, I just stop wherever I was and you pray and it's all done in silence and everything's forgiven. That's how I was raised. Then and that's what Protestant faith really, for the most part, that's what we think. Then I enter the Catholic Church and, oh my goodness, okay, now I did that. And that's a confession sin for sure. Everything is a confession sin. That's a for sure one. I'm going to have to go deal with that. Then I think, what about my parents? Over their whole lives, mortal sins. So I look it up. And basically the answer that I'm gathering is that, hey, according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 1452, perfect contrition. That's what does it. And perfect contrition is it's contrition that arises from a love by which God is loved above all else. When that happens, contrition is called perfect. That's right from the Catechism. Now, perfect contrition is sorrow for sins because they offended God, not because I'm afraid of hell. If I'm afraid of hell or I'm embarrassed or mortified by the sin that I committed, that's imperfect contrition. And that works with confession, and those mortal sins are washed away. But without the sacrament of reconciliation, I've got to have perfect contrition. And even then, the Catechism says that as long it can remit mortal sins, as long as it includes the firm resolution to have recourse to sacramental confession as soon as possible. So what about Protestants who don't have access to that?
This is always one of those hard things because it means that in reality that their lives are deficient in that area. There's a deficiency, and it is a deficiency that will have a consequence. Now, do I understand the consequence entirely? Can I label that consequence with words and repercussions? No, I can't. Okay, I cannot. I don't know what those repercussions and consequences will be. I know they exist. I believe they exist. I'm. This is again where I'm going to have some hope and belief because I have Protestant relatives, or I had Protestant relatives. My grandmother was Lutheran, so trust me. My grandmother on my father's side was Lutheran, and my grandfather was as well. And so, I have to have some trust that how God is going to work things out. I may not understand, but he's going to work things out, because I believe that they were trying to live their faith to the fullness of what they could live, what they knew, what they believed. Even though someone may see the Catholic Church, that doesn't mean that something has been planted in them that's going to grow. Okay. And so I don't know how culpable they are for dismissing the church, so to speak.
Right. I think that goes into, at least it touches on, I know invincible ignorance is generally speaking something slightly different, where it's people who never heard anything about God. But I do think that same concept has to apply in this situation. I know last week it
applies a little bit, I would think, or there's some application of it.
Where I think the culpability comes in. What can you see? I know that last week I talked about my daughter and how I didn't have her baptized right before she passed away. And when I reread scripture and I found passages, and all of a sudden, once I'd heard that baptism was important or essential from a Catholic, these passages made more sense to me. But previously, I could read them over and it just never got through my understanding. I do believe that a lot of that plays out with certain Protestants, with certain issues, where it just never crosses the mind. And I think God's not going to hold us culpable for something we can't possibly grasp, at least at this moment.
Unless the seed is opened up, that suddenly becomes like, oh, I can see it for what it really means. If I'm blind, in this case, can I really read those pieces of scripture and understand them? So is my blindness something that then I'm responsible for?
It's very
in that way, it gets very complicated and murky. And this is where, there are people who would say, yes, they are, and they would hold firm and, like they're going to hell. And that's what led to crusades and many other things over the centuries. But at the same point in time, that can be the reason for doing very horrible things to people. And that, I don't think that's justified by our faith. Okay. It's why we've had to make, as a church, apologies. The Pope has made apologies on behalf of the church for some of our living out of that in history, that led to really horrible ways of responding, and I don't think that horrible ways of responding can be justified for faith, so that's my feeling. Okay.
No.
And many times in these conversations, I'm expressing my opinion. When I am talking on behalf of the church, I say, this is what the church believes.
Sure.
Okay. And I try to make sure I use both of those very carefully in this, because I might be wrong. Maybe I'm looking at it entirely wrong, but that's not the take I have from everything I've read.
And that's the beauty, I think, or at least for me, that's the interesting part of this conversation is, I don't know what the answer is. I don't have a definitive answer.
And
I'm
even
exploring.
my research hasn't given a definitive answer for
I don't think there is. I think the strongest thing that we can come back to are a couple of the things that we've already mentioned, is that, why is it important to reach out to Protestants when the opportunity arises and in the appropriate manners? Remembering love is the primary motivator here. That's the goal. And why is that important? It's the deficiency and, missing out on the Eucharist, missing out on the sacrament of reconciliation. Those are great, powerful movements of God. It's literally a moment, a touchstone of grace in our lives where God intersects with us in a physical manner to some extent. I mean, boom, there it is. It changes people. And when you don't have that, you're missing it. And so I think those are important. And I think really when it gets back to, asking the original question, is it important to evangelize Protestants? And I think we've kind of meandered through some things. What we not focused on or not brought up, I think, is the answer to the whole thing. Is I think it is important for one reason.
Yes.
Jesus wants us to be one. He wants, in John 17:20-21, I've got that quote. This is from the NRSV. And it's, Father, I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word. So all of us, Jesus prays that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. And then he continues the prayer in verse 22 and literally asks that all Christians be one as he and the Father are one. And Jesus and the Father don't share different views on the Eucharist. They're not debating that. They don't disagree on whether infant baptism is good or bad. Jesus doesn't think we're saved by faith alone, while the Father is kind of a faith and works guy. They're all on the same page in that. So our differences as Catholics and Protestants, they matter to God and to Jesus. They matter because I think they reduce our effectiveness to combat evil in the world, to work as a group, to do what God sent us to do. And I think our differences make it harder for the world to see us and believe that the Lord sent us. That's literally what he prayed. That they may see that we're one and see that I sent you.
Division doesn't help Christianity. It doesn't in any way. And I think that phrase, that passage, Christ said it for a reason. He already knew what was going to happen. He had the knowledge of that. Okay. And nothing worse than being able to foresee the future, in a sense, know the future. And he knew it. And he's already challenging us about it. He was challenging us even before we could have had divisions, but there were already divisions, by the way. There were already people who had walked away. There were already problems in amongst the disciples. They just hadn't manifested yet, in the fullness. But I think we forget oneness is very important for making people see the value of Christianity, Christian faith. Division is why people can so quickly dismiss Christianity and dismiss it as like, oh, this is just another human thing.
Exactly. It's just like everything else. It's your little group of ideas.
Yeah.
But we've got our group of ideas, and
Exactly
everybody's the same.
So yeah, it does make it. Yes, it is important. Yes, it does make a difference. Yes, we need to evangelize. I believe all of that is a yes, yes, yes. It's just what I want to make sure we are on the right page about is how and when and why we're doing it. All of that matters greatly. And you hit on it. If it isn't being done out of love, if it's not being done with the love of God in our hearts and a real love for that person, we're gonna do it entirely in the wrong way and with the wrong tools.
Right. And love understands, love is a lot of things, but another one aspect is it understands what's needed at the moment. And there were things I needed to hear when I was starting this whole journey to Catholicism. And sometimes those things had to be pretty in my face. Most of the times in the beginning, certainly, it needed to be really gentle proddings, just conversations, open conversations where I could ask a question and they could ask a question and nobody was yelling. Nobody was upset. Nobody got out their crusade gear, and we didn't have that kind of engagement. So I think that's where it all starts I think it starts with understanding that this is what Jesus wants. It is important. We don't want to just, hey, they got their thing and they love Jesus, so great. We'll just coexist. Jesus wants us to be one. But he wants us to get there in the way that he got everybody there. He challenged when you needed to be challenged. He loved when, was super kind and, just embracing when that was needed. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to walk that line. I think we just need to understand the value of what we've got as Catholics, be willing to share the good news of that when the opportunities happen, and not shy away when the situation does call for a little bolder step. And we'll know it when it happens.
We will. I mean, I think it's interesting. That is exactly where Paul's beautiful phrase or passage that we use for weddings is really true. And this love is patient, love is kind, love, all those things he's telling us love is. That's exactly what needs to be in our hearts and minds when we're doing this. All of those aspects of what love is. I always think it's funny. We apply it to couples, and it does apply to couples. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it was meant to apply to discipleship first and foremost.
That is interesting, because every time we hear it, I always think
of a wedding.
Yeah, exactly. I'll try to think of it from the other point of view, because you're exactly right. That's what gets us off on the right foot.
Exactly.
All right. I think we're going to wrap it up. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear them. You can email those to comments@icatholic.show. We thank you for listening. For Intentionally Catholic, I'm Dan Hansen.
I'm Father Ron Hutchinson. God bless.
Thanks for listening to Intentionally Catholic. If you like what you heard, please consider sharing our show with a friend. If you have comments, questions, or topics you'd like to hear discussed, please email those to comments@icatholic.show. And be sure to tune in next time for another episode.